Okay. I'm very grateful to be here today. I'm very grateful to celebrate the graduation of the 22 newest police officers. I'm also grateful that we have a member recovering at home. They're going to make a full recovery, and I'm grateful for that. We could very easily be having a different conversation. We could be having the conversation they're having in Burnaby. We could be having the conversation that they've had in Ontario several times over the last month. And that's obviously extremely concerning to me and to the members I represent. I think it's critically important that community leaders show support openly and publicly for the police. The rise in anti-police sentiment is concerning, and this type of behavior towards police officers is unacceptable. I think Mayor Gondek's comments today were excellent, and I think it's a good start, but I'd like to see that from more and more community leaders.
And on that note, like today especially, both the chief and the mayor did include the incident this morning. The importance of having that conversation, especially to a recruit class, like this is the new world that we live in.
Yeah, I would agree. I think those comments were well received by our recruits. They were certainly well received by me. And I'll say it again, if not for the professionalism, the training, and the bravery shown by our officer, we would be having a very different conversation today.
Can you talk about what you've just been hearing from other members? I'm sure you've spoken to quite a few officers that were either at the scene or have been to similar scenes throughout their career. What have you been hearing from them, and what's sort of the mood after something like this happens in the force?
Well, the number one concern of our members, as well as my number one concern, is the well-being of our member. And as I said, our member is going to make a full recovery. I think it's a time of reflection for our members. I think it's a time where we come together and appreciate each other and how we keep each other safe. But I also think it's a time where we reflect on the very real dangers that this job carries.
I appreciate that this member will make a full recovery, and that is something to celebrate. But when the phone rings, when the texts come in to say that an officer has been involved in something like this, what is your initial reaction? Is it just immediate worry?
It's immediate worry for sure. I think it's concern for the member, but also their family, their teammates, their colleagues on the street, and for the broader policing community. When these things happen, and it's happening far too often in Canada, it's a time where we all need to think about how we view the police and think about a lot of the things that are being said publicly, and recognize that our members are there to protect the community and do so with great integrity.
Can you talk about what sort of support the officers that were involved will receive? Obviously, the individual that was shot, but also there was a fatality here, and that obviously affects people as well. Can you talk about the supports and what effect that might have?
Certainly, I think the chief may be better placed to speak to this, but they have the full support of the Calgary Police Association and the Calgary Police Service. Psychological services are available to these officers. Peer support is available to these officers. And as I said, they will receive the full support from both organizations.
Thank you.
Could you just, provide a bit of an overview from the Police Commission's perspective on the events of earlier today?
I think, like everyone in the city, it's of concern to us, and the Commission especially. The trends towards violence overall, the concern with the police members and the service members. We just had a graduation today, and here's 22 young people who stepped up to help keep this community safe. And when you see what harm can be done, it's a huge concern. So we need to continue to work with the service and work with the city and make sure that our service members have the resources they need, and that they have the support they need. Much like Constable Neufeld said, it's about all of us in this community, bringing the support to make it a safe community.
Can you talk about the role the Commission plays and when something like this happens? Obviously, we heard that ASIRT is taking over the investigation. CPS will obviously be supporting the officers. Where does the Commission come in when something like this happens?
Our role is as a support. We let ASIRT take its role. The service does its role around operations and looking for process and areas and things that need to change or things that need to continue. And so we will afterwards have a conversation about, is there anything else that we can do to support? But in general, our role is a governance role. We don't get into the operation side of things. It's much more about governance. One of the concerns we have always with these things is the wellness of the service members. And so that's one of the things that we'll talk about afterwards. Are they getting the supports they need? Do their families, do their community support? Are they feeling well before they go back to work and all those sorts of things? So, but our role is a governance role, and so we will stand back and then ask the conversations afterwards about what needs to be done, if anything.
I get this. We know that this is obviously the headline incident today, but we've been hearing at commission meetings throughout the year about the increase in violence and the increase in guns that are being seized. I guess just can you take us through what the commission has been hearing leading up to an event like today?
Well, I think as much as you've said, the trends, and much as Constable Neufeld said, the trends are increasing. And it's not just Calgary. It's the province, it's the country. Overall, it's just becoming more discouraging, and we have to keep on top of it. At the same time, there are some good things that are being done, providing the support, making sure that we're taking care of the service members, and making sure that the city knows that we have an excellent service, and we have a group that's looking out for our community overall. But it does take everybody, and we do need to make sure that we're all working on this together. Anything else?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief, can you just provide an update on the situation this morning?
Yeah, I can. It'll be fairly high level because, of course, all of this is under investigation by ASIRT, as you know. But the bottom line is we had, at 3 o'clock in the morning, we had a member called to what really seemed to be an innocuous call, just kind of a suspicious vehicle with a noise complaint attached. And so the member responded to the call. An incident occurred which resulted in gunfire being exchanged, and it resulted in later the death of a male, all of which is under investigation by ASIRT. I can tell you that we've had a tremendous outpouring of support from the community, from first responder partners and that type of thing, and I'm really thankful for that, and I wanted to get that update out there because we've had that all throughout the day. But I do think it's very disconcerting, the amount of violence we've seen against police officers across the country, and certainly now here in Calgary again. It's not that we haven't seen it, and it's not that these events, these significant events that we're seeing now, are the only events, right? We see physical assaults and this type of thing, and I think it's a very disconcerting trend that we're seeing.
Was that officer there on their own initially?
Yeah, it was a single person car that responded to the call initially, yes.
And what can you tell us about their condition now, hours later?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that I'm very thankful. When you talk about circumstances like this, the situation could have ended very differently. I can tell you I'm proud of the officer and the way that he responded. He will fully recover from this. Certainly there's not just the physical implications, but there's the emotional implications as well. But I'm happy to say that he will do very well, but this could have been a much, much different day.
You mentioned that this was sort of an innocuous call, and so he was a single officer responding initially. Does that give any sort of pause to, do we always have to send, say, 2 officers, because even innocuous calls could end in gunfire?
Yeah, and you're right. I think therein lies one of the challenges that officers have to balance, right? So sometimes you get these calls that, appear like they would be innocuous, and then when you get there, they turn out to be anything but. And similarly, sometimes you get calls when they come in, they sound like it'll be chaos and an elevated level of risk, and then you get there and then it's not that. So I think that, when calls come in, sometimes the original information that you get from somebody, and that can change even as the officers are responding. So it's very difficult for them. But I think, we talked this morning with officers at the 7 o'clock parade, just talking about the fact that there's no such thing as a routine call. I would say that there's an unknown risk to a traffic stop or types of calls, but there's no such thing as routine.
I'll ask the same question I asked to John. When you wake up this morning and you hear about this, I'm sure you were awake before the rest of us and hear about this. It's graduation day. We've talked about the need for more police officers here, and then an officer is injured in this way. Does your head go, not again?
I got to tell you, on a very personal note, when that phone rang this morning, because it rang at a time when it shouldn't ring, and as a police chief, your phone is always on, and when it rings at that time, it's not good news. It's never good news when it rings at that time. And I got to tell you, for me, it was probably a bit of a throwback to the phone call I got on December 31st with Sergeant Harnett. And so you approach that with a lot of trepidation, right? You go and take the call, but it's like, oh goodness, right? What is this going to be? And like I say, I'm thrilled the way this worked out, but I'm mindful that the circumstances of this are such that it could have worked out much, much differently. So very thankful for that. But it's a hard thing when these sorts of calls come in, for sure. And you do worry. And it wasn't lost on me, your point about today being graduation day, because I know myself and my colleagues feel a great weight of responsibility for the young people coming in. And we're fortunate to have young people like this stepping up, young Calgarians coming, wanting to protect the community and serve the community. And these folks they're not the enemy. These folks are from us, they're with us, and they are us. And these folks want to come out and help make things better. And so when you look them in the eye and you look their parents in the eye, and it's like, we got this. We hire excellent people. We do a very good job training them. We provide them with good equipment, and we lead them well. And I think that's a recipe for good things to happen, but you feel very responsible on days like today. And I can tell you, I felt the weight of that today.
You mentioned right off the top that ASIRT will be conducting an investigation.
Yes.
What sort of investigation or review of what happened will CPS be taking on?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. Anytime something like this happens, there's a critical incident of any kind, we do an operational review right away. And it's not an investigation per se, because the investigation is obviously being done by ASIRT, and that's an independent body, and so that's good. That's as it should be. We actually look right away at things to do with policy, training, and equipment. So if there's anything obvious that sticks out in our policies or systems that we need to change to make things either safer for the public or safer for officers, we'll do that as quickly as we can. We know that at times the ASIRT investigations can take a little bit longer. So if there's lessons learned that we need to take, we want to do that right away. So that's our response.
And you mentioned, obviously, there's been quite a few high-profile violence incidents against cops, but we know that overall in Calgary we're seeing quite the rise in violence, whether that's with guns or other weapons or just assaults. I guess this might be the golden question, but why, and what can you as a police force do to make sure that these things aren't happening as much as we've been hearing about?
It's a good question. The why is a hard one. We know when we look at homicides as an example, there is 25%, as we've said, we can substantially link to gang crime or organized crime. The other 75 have been across the spectrum, from domestics to regular disputes to things we don't even know. You can appreciate sometimes we get a call, there's been a shooting, and people have heard gunfire. Our officers go and they find shell casings, but then nobody's around and there's no evidence. So it's hard to attribute that to anything. When we look at just regular violence or shooting, other types of violence, those types of calls are up a little bit, and it's hard to know at this point whether that is a trend that will continue, whether that's a spike as a result of sort of coming out of the pandemic. It's hard to know, but what we have seen is that a small portion of the community is willing to pull the trigger in Calgary. They're willing to use violence, serious violence, against other citizens, and they're willing to use serious violence against the police. It's got to be a huge concern for all of us, right? In terms of the safety of our community, and so all of us have to be part of the solution to make that stop.
Do we know much about the deceased man in this case? Did he have a history with police? Are those details you could share right now?
Right, those are details. It's so early in the investigation right now. We'll leave those pieces to ASIRT. And so again, just thinking of the man's family and such too, we'll let all of that progress through ASIRT.
Can I just ask, given the rise in violence that we're seeing against police officers, not just in Calgary but around Canada, just in the past couple of weeks, what kind of effect does that have on officer mental health and the mental health of young families?
Well, I think it's a huge weight that people carry. I mean, as I said, I'm getting tired of wearing this ribbon. In fact, it's to the point where I haven't taken it off now for probably 6 weeks. And it's actually worse than that. If you look beyond Calgary and beyond Canada, I was last week in Major City Chiefs. So it's all the major cities in North America. So I was at some meetings for 3 days. and this was the day before I left, the 2 officers in South Simcoe were murdered. So the first day I got the meetings were in Dallas, Texas. On day 1, there was an officer from Dallas, Texas coming to work that was killed by a drunk driver traveling the wrong way. On day 2, one of my colleagues from Raleigh, North Carolina, had to get up and leave the meeting because 2 of her officers were shot, one fatally by a 15-year-old with a rifle in Raleigh. And on the 3rd day, the chief from Las Vegas Metro had to get up and leave because one of his officers was shot and killed in Vegas. And then we've had Constable Yang right after that in Burnaby, and then we've had a very close call in Calgary today. So it does weigh very heavily on police and families, like the families you see today. And that's why I think it's symbolic that we're speaking at GRAD, because we honor the young people that have come into the police service and the accomplishment and their willingness and dedication to serve the community, and their families are here celebrating, but it weighs on them. It absolutely does. So yeah, it's just been too much.
So how do you stop all this violence against police officers? What needs to happen?
Well, it's a really good question. I can tell you that there's a lot of rhetoric out there that's negative towards police officers. And there's elements of the community, the fringe typically, that are espousing violence against our institutions, espousing violence and poor treatment of elected officials and public officials. And if you were to go on the dark web and look at some of the posts by some groups on the dark web, they are actively espousing and promoting violence against police officers. So you and I, when we're on the regular internet, don't see that. But it isn't very hard to get on some of those other spaces to see what some groups are espousing. And it's frankly shocking. And, I think in the US, after as the midterm elections came up and after the FBI had done some raids in respect of the former president, like that went up like a shot. And so this is the type of stuff that's on there that people are seeing and putting out there. And I believe that it's translating into real world violence against police officers. And this is something we've all got to be concerned about. It's not okay.
I don't want to prejudge the officer's injury, but what the prospects are for being able to return to work.
I would say full recovery. Yeah, return to work.
Do you know how long the officer will be off work?
I don't know.
I know there's an element of it's up to them.
Yeah, 100%. I would say that the injuries, very fortunately, were quite minor, and I would see, from a physical perspective, 100% recovery, return to work.
What does that say to you in an incident like this? Like you said, it seems innocuous, but for a person to shoot a police officer, there's not huge sums of money involved, or they're feeling immediately threatened by an officer with a weapon, for example. But how did it escalate to that point? What does that say to you?
It's a great question, and I think that's going to come out in the investigation. Again, the individual that was involved there, to see the history of that person, history with the police, what was going on. Family and friends will probably have some idea as to what was going on in the individual's life, but certainly 10 hours after this has happened, that's information I don't have, but that's color that will be added later, I suspect.
So this was that individual's starting point, was to go for a weapon.
Well, what I would say is this seemed to have escalated very, very quickly. Why? I have no idea.
We're talking about extreme actions and extreme controversies people going into, basically people talking about violence against police online. What are your thoughts on how to stifle that? How do we calm this basically trying to get people on the
Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of this will be looking at these cases. So, it's fortunate that they're not all happening in any particular city, but the downside of that is until somebody has the information about all of them, it's hard to pick out trends and issues that might be driving them. So I think that's a piece of work that maybe needs to be done nationally to say what's that picture, because the sample size in any city is thankfully very small. So, but I think in the aggregate to look and see what is going on, because the investigations even into the death, the murder of Constable Yang, the murder of PC Hong in Toronto, and the murder of the officers in South Simcoe, those are all still in their infancy as well. So there's probably a lot of information that actually can be compared one another with some of these incidents that'll tell us some things, but right now we don't have that. So I think again it's police leaders across the country talking about what's happening in these cases and trying to figure out what the trends are. But I just think the big thing is that as a community, we need to understand that there's a small segment that's willing to use violence, indiscriminately in our cities, which is really quite remarkable. And those folks are even willing to use it against police officers. And again, that's not okay. And that should be a concern of every single one of us working together to make that stop. So if I'm a citizen and I have some idea that somebody's involved in this type of thing, I should be calling Crime Stoppers or calling the police. Police are out there doing what they can do, certainly, but I think it's a whole of system approach and an open approach, realizing that this does nobody any good.
This is a bit of a technical question, and I appreciate it's in its infancy, so perhaps you can't answer. But was there any physical interaction between the officer and the gentleman who's now deceased? We've received some information that I'm not sure is true and haven't confirmed that this gentleman was handcuffed. And the only way I can see that happening is if they had an interaction first and then he managed to take off. But even then, I can't wrap my head around the physicality of being handcuffed and running with a gun. And are you able to shed any light on any of that?
This is the first time I've heard about being handcuffed, but yeah, I'll leave it for ASIRT, but I'll say that this is the first time I've heard anything about handcuffing. So I can't confirm.
I guess just what is your message to other officers on the force? Obviously, not everyone would know the officer. It's a big force, but obviously would probably be affected just by hearing this. So what's your message to the entire force and all the frontline officers?
Yeah, I would say my message to police officers here in Calgary, Calgary Police Service, and police officers across Alberta and Canada is just thank you for the work that you're doing. It's an unbelievably difficult time to be doing this work, and yet they keep going out and doing it. They keep coming back, and good folks keep joining to do it because it matters. And so in the meantime, I think they need to know that they're supported by their leaders. They need to know they're supported by the community, and they need to know that they're supported by their peers. And I think it's just look after each other, right? Like we're blessed in a city like this to be able to have officers close by. So if you're on a traffic stop, and again, nothing's routine, officers are driving by and checking on one another. If we've got one-person units out there, people need to be mindful of that and need to be checking in. And again, relying on your training and your tactics. They're given really, really good training and tactics and equipment. And when you use that, that's the best way forward. So there's supports, I think, to the point about this landing heavy on people. There's certainly support one another, support your families, and the service has lots of supports available. And you talked about some of those to support people during difficult times.
Just one, because nobody asked every other question I've got. It was mentioned today too, and you brought it up again about we live in a world where there is a lot of miscommunication. I know it just doesn't stem up the police force to help the public with that, but I think you had some very strong words about that. What would you say to the public out there? A lot of people just aren't educated with what they're reading, and maybe sources are coming from so many different directions. What would your take on these people when they're seeing this stuff very, on their phones and everything?
Yeah. I would say it's really important for all of us not to get sucked in by misinformation and disinformation, because there's a lot of it out there. And we see on social media lots of times, and I realize not everybody's on social media and not everybody's contributing to it. But at the same time, you see a lot of comment that is vitriolic, and it's got nothing to do with any fact or that sort of thing. But we know how algorithms work. We know how certain apps work that feed you more of the same sometimes. So you can get a very... just a very uneven view, I think, of things. So I think folks should be open-minded. The police are doing a very difficult job in the city, and sometimes there are situations where there's use of force and that sort of thing. It's just good to know the police are more accountable, I think, than any other profession. There's independent investigations. They're investigated criminally. These things are taken very seriously, but lots of times there isn't answers right away. But the point is, under the governance of the Police Commission and under the independent investigations of ASIRT, we will get to the bottom of those things. So jumping to conclusions and then spreading mis and disinformation does not help anyone. So have an open mind, support your police in the difficult job they're doing.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Have a great day. Thank you for coming today.